The Cat Who Stole Thanksgiving, funny and relaxing sleep story. Alex had never intended to spend Thanksgiving in a mansion. Yet here they were, standing in the marble-floored entryway of the Ashford estate, a rolling suitcase at their side and a ring of brass keys heavy in their palm. The house was silent in that particular way that only truly expensive homes can be. Not the absence of sound, but rather the presence of a quality of quiet so thick it seemed to muffle even the softest breath. Through the tall windows flanking the front door, late November sunlight fell in golden columns, catching motes of dust that drifted like tiny planets in their own slow orbits. The decision to house sit had been practical at first. Alex's lease had ended on the 15th, and their new apartment wouldn't be available until December 3rd. When Mrs. Ashford had mentioned, somewhat apologetically, that she and her husband would be spending 3 weeks in Tuscany and desperately needed someone to watch the house and, more importantly, feed Barnaby, it had seemed like perfect timing. The generous payment didn't hurt either. But there was something else, something Alex hadn't quite admitted to themselves until they declined their sister's invitation to the family Thanksgiving in Ohio. They wanted this, the solitude, the space, the temporary inhabiting of a life that wasn't theirs, and a place where no one expected anything except that the cat be fed and the plants be watered. Alex moved deeper into the house, their footsteps echoing softly against the hardwood floors. The Ashford estate was the kind of place featured in architecture magazines. All clean lines and carefully curated antiques, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and windows that framed the wooded property like living paintings. There was a kitchen with copper pots hanging from a ceiling rack, a library with leather chairs worn soft from use, and a living room dominated by a fireplace large enough to stand in. Mrs. Ashford had given Alex a thorough tour, pointing out the thermostat, the temperamental espresso machine, and the alarm system that required a 16-digit code. But most of her instructions had concerned Barnaby. "He's not unfriendly," Mrs. Ashford had said, her tone suggesting this was a generous interpretation. "He's just discerning, very discerning. He'll eat twice a day, always at 7 in the morning and 6 in the evening. He prefers his water in the ceramic bowl, not the metal one. And please don't take it personally if he ignores you completely. He's like that with everyone except Roger." Roger, presumably, was Mr. Ashford. Alex had only met him briefly, a quiet man with silver hair who'd been loading luggage into a town car. Alex found Barnaby in the library, occupying a leather chair as though it were a throne. He was enormous. Alex had owned cats before, had grown up with the lean, scrappy barn cats that prowled their grandmother's property. But Barnaby was something else entirely. He had to weigh at least 20 pounds, maybe more, all of it hidden beneath a cloud of silver-gray fur so thick and luxurious that he seemed to blur at the edges. His face was distinctly Persian, flat, with a pushed-in nose and enormous amber eyes that regarded Alex with an expression of profound, almost philosophical disdain. "Hello, Barnaby," Alex said softly, approaching slowly. The cat blinked once. It was a slow, deliberate blink, the kind that might have signaled trust or affection in another cat. In Barnaby, it clearly communicated something closer to, "I acknowledge your existence, but barely." Then he turned his massive head away, directing his attention to the window and the bird feeder beyond it, effectively dismissing Alex from consideration. "Right," Alex murmured. "Good talk." The first few days established a rhythm. Alex woke early, moving through the quiet house with a cup of coffee cradled between their palms, watching the morning light shift across the property. At precisely 7, Barnaby would appear in the kitchen, silent as smoke despite his size, and sit before his empty bowl with an expression of weary patience. Alex would measure out the exact portion Mrs. Ashford had specified, and Barnaby would eat with delicate precision, leaving not a single kibble behind. Then he would disappear, ghosting through the house on some feline schedule known only to himself. Alex tracked his movements without really trying. There was the sunny spot on the rug in the upstairs hall where Barnaby could be found between 9 and 11 each morning, stretched out like a luxurious draft excluder. There was the window sill in the study where he perched in the afternoons, watching the woods with an intensity that suggested he was mentally hunting every squirrel and bird that dared to venture into his view. And there was the leather chair in the library, his evening throne, where he would sit from roughly 4 o'clock until his 6 o'clock dinner. Alex tried in those first days to bridge the gap between them. They would sit on the floor near wherever Barnaby had stationed himself, reading or scrolling through their phone, speaking in a soft, steady voice about nothing in particular. The cat never acknowledged these attempts. He didn't hiss or retreat. He simply existed in a state of profound indifference, as though Alex were no more interesting than a piece of furniture. A mobile, occasionally noisy piece of furniture that had the useful quality of opening cans, but furniture nonetheless. By Tuesday, Alex had stopped taking it personally. There was something oddly peaceful about sharing space with a creature who demanded nothing but routine. The house itself was soothing in its order and quiet. Alex found themselves moving more slowly, breathing more deeply, noticing small things, the way afternoon light turned the library golden, the smell of old books and lemon polish, the distant sound of wind in the bare branches outside. They realized, content. This was what they'd wanted without quite knowing it. A pause. A pocket of time outside the usual demands and expectations, where they could simply be. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and clear, the sky a pale, cloudless blue that seemed to amplify the sunlight until everything gleamed. Alex woke early, before even Barnaby's 7 o'clock expectations, and lay in the guest room bed, considering their plans for the day. They could have accepted their sister's invitation. They could have driven to Ohio, sat around the too small table in their childhood home, navigated the familiar tensions and questions about their life, their plans, their persistent singleness. Instead, they were here, alone except for a cat who pretended they didn't exist, and they felt something very close to happiness. They decided to cook. Not a full feast that seemed excessive for one person, but something real, something that honored the day. The Ashfords had left their kitchen well stocked, and Alex had supplemented with a grocery trip earlier in the week. In the freezer, they'd stored a single turkey leg, enormous, still on the bone, the kind of thing that would roast up golden and crispy skinned if treated right. Alex moved through the morning preparations with a sense of ceremony. They set the turkey leg in a roasting pan, massaging it with olive oil and fresh herbs from the pots on the kitchen windowsill. Rosemary, thyme, sage. The scent alone was transformative, filling the kitchen with something ancient and comforting, a smell that spoke of hearth and harvest and home. They prepared sides, roasted vegetables tossed with honey and balsamic vinegar, a small portion of stuffing made from sourdough bread and celery, and onions that sizzled in butter. They worked slowly, savoring each step, aware of the sunlight streaming through the windows and the quiet of the house around them. Barnaby appeared at some point, attracted perhaps by the sounds and smells. He stationed himself in the kitchen doorway, sitting perfectly upright with his tail wrapped around his front paws, and watched. Alex glanced at him occasionally, noting the way his nostrils flared delicately, the way his amber eyes tracked each movement. For the first time, the cat seemed actively interested in something Alex was doing. "Smells good, doesn't it?" Alex said conversationally, basting the turkey leg with its own juices. Barnaby's ear twitched, but he offered no other response. By early afternoon, everything was ready. The turkey leg had reached that perfect state of doneness, the skin golden and crackling, the meat tender enough to fall from the bone, the herbs darkened and fragrant. Alex plated it carefully on one of the Ashford's beautiful ceramic dishes, adding the roasted vegetables arranged just so, a small mound of stuffing, a drizzle of pan juices that gleamed in the light. They set the plate on the granite kitchen island, stepping back to admire their work. It was, they thought with satisfaction, possibly the most beautiful Thanksgiving meal they'd ever made. They remembered then that they'd forgotten to pour something to drink. The Ashfords had an impressive wine collection in a temperature-controlled cellar off the kitchen, and Mrs. Ashford had specifically told Alex to help themselves. Alex moved into the cellar, scanning the racks for something appropriate, something that would complement turkey without overwhelming it. They selected a bottle, examined the label, decided it was perfect. The whole detour took perhaps 90 seconds. When Alex returned to the kitchen, the plate was still there on the island, but the turkey leg was gone. For a moment, Alex simply stood there, confused. They looked around the kitchen as though the turkey leg might have somehow migrated on its own, might be perched on the counter or hiding behind the flour canister. But no, the vegetables remained. The stuffing remained. The artful drizzle of pan juices remained. But the center, the main event, the golden, herb-crusted, perfectly cooked turkey leg had vanished. Then Alex noticed the trail. Small but definite. Tiny fragments of crispy skin and herb flakes leading from the island across the hardwood floor and disappearing into the living room. Alex followed, wine bottle still in hand, and found themselves staring at a scene of such pure absurdity that they almost laughed out loud. The antique sofa in the living room sat low to the ground, its carved mahogany legs ornate but short. The clearance beneath it was perhaps 8 inches, no more, and from beneath that narrow space protruded the enormous fluffy hindquarters of Barnaby, the cat. His massive body was wedged under the sofa, only his back half visible, and that back half was wiggling with effort as he dragged something deeper into his den. Alex knelt down, setting the wine bottle aside, and peered under the sofa. 2 amber eyes stared back at them from the shadows, and there, clutched between Barnaby's front paws like a prize of war, was the turkey leg. The cat had somehow, in the span of 90 seconds, leaped onto the kitchen island, seized a piece of food nearly as large as his head, carried it through 2 rooms, and wedged himself under furniture to protect his prize. His expression, visible even in the dim space beneath the sofa, was one of absolute unrepentant smugness. "Barnaby," Alex said, their voice caught between exasperation and disbelief. "That's my dinner." The cat blinked slowly. Then, maintaining eye contact, he bent his head and took a deliberate bite of turkey. "You've got to be kidding me," Alex muttered, but they were smiling despite themselves. What followed was a negotiation that would have been perfectly at home in a diplomatic summit, except that one of the negotiators was a cat who had no interest whatsoever in diplomacy. Alex tried reasoning first, explaining in calm, patient tones that the turkey was meant for them, that Barnaby had his own food, that surely they could come to an arrangement. Barnaby responded by turning his back, as much as one could turn their back while wedged under a sofa, and continuing to gnaw on his prize. Alex retrieved treats from the kitchen, the expensive ones Mrs. Ashford kept for special occasions. They shook the bag near the sofa's edge, making the enticing rattle that usually drove cats wild. Barnaby's ears flicked backward, acknowledging the sound, but he didn't budge. Alex placed a small pile of treats just outside his reach. Barnaby ignored them completely. Next came toys. Alex found a feather wand in the basket near the cat tree and waved it enticingly, dragging the feathers across the floor in patterns designed to trigger every hunting instinct. For the first time, Barnaby showed interest. His eyes widened, his haunches tensed. For one hopeful moment, Alex thought he might abandon the turkey. Then Barnaby's attention snapped back to his prize, and he pulled it another inch deeper under the sofa. "Okay," Alex said, lying flat on their stomach and reaching under the furniture. New plan. Their fingers brushed Barnaby's fur, impossibly soft, and the cat's entire body went tense. They stretched further, arm aching, fingertips just barely touching the turkey leg. Barnaby growled, actually growled, a sound so unexpectedly fierce from such a fluffy creature that Alex jerked their hand back in surprise. And in that moment of retreat, Barnaby seized the turkey leg in his teeth and, with a burst of speed that seemed impossible for a cat of his size and demeanor, dragged it to the very back corner beneath the sofa, completely beyond reach. Alex lay there on the living room floor, cheek pressed to the hardwood, arms still extended uselessly under the furniture, and started to laugh. It began as a chuckle, then grew into genuine laughter that shook their shoulders and brought tears to their eyes. The absurdity of it all, their careful preparations, their beautiful meal, their quiet, dignified Thanksgiving, all hijacked by an overweight Persian cat with an attitude problem. They laughed until their stomach hurt, until they had to roll onto their back and stare at the ceiling, gasping for breath. Barnaby, from his fortress beneath the sofa, made a sound that might have been a confused meow. "You win," Alex said finally, still smiling. "You absolute menace. You win." They pushed themselves up, brushed dust from their clothes, and returned to the kitchen. The vegetables and stuffing were still perfectly good, and there was bread for sandwiches. They made themselves a plate, poured the wine they'd selected, and carried everything back to the living room. Sitting on the floor with their back against an armchair a few feet from the sofa that concealed Barnaby and his stolen treasure, Alex ate their improvised Thanksgiving meal and found it tasted better than it had any right to. Perhaps because it came with a story now. Perhaps because the day had become memorable instead of merely pleasant. From beneath the sofa came the sounds of contented eating, small, satisfied grunts, and the occasional crack of bone. Alex raised their wine glass in a mock toast toward the furniture. "Happy Thanksgiving, Barnaby," they said softly. The afternoon wore on. Alex finished their meal, washed the dishes, and settled in the library with a book they'd been meaning to read for months. The house maintained its quality of deep quiet, broken only by the occasional creak of old wood settling, and once the distant thump that indicated Barnaby had finally extracted himself from beneath the sofa. Alex didn't see him, but they heard his heavy footsteps padding up the stairs, presumably to claim his afternoon windowsill. It was around 4 o'clock when Alex first noticed the change. The light coming through the library windows had shifted, taken on a strange greenish quality. The air felt heavier, charged with something electric. Alex set down their book and walked to the window, looking out over the Ashford property. The sky to the west had gone dark, not with the natural darkness of evening, but with something denser, more ominous. Clouds were rolling in, massive and bruised-looking, moving with a speed that seemed unnatural. The first rumble of thunder came a moment later. Distant but deep, a sound felt as much as heard. Alex watched as the wind picked up, sending dead leaves skittering across the lawn and making the bare branches of the trees sway and creak. The storm was coming fast, eating up the distance between horizon and house with voracious speed. Another rumble, closer now, and Alex could see the clouds roiling, churning like something alive. They moved through the house, closing windows, checking that doors were secure. The temperature was dropping. They could feel it through the glass, and the wind was growing stronger, beginning to rattle the panes in their frames. The first drops of rain arrived not as a gentle patter, but as a sudden assault, fat drops that struck the windows with audible force. Within seconds it intensified, becoming a downpour that turned the world outside gray and indistinct. Lightning flashed, illuminating the entire house for a split second in harsh, white light, and the thunder that followed was immediate and enormous, a crack so loud that Alex felt it in their chest. The storm wasn't approaching anymore. It had arrived. Alex made their way to the kitchen, thinking about candles and flashlights, backups for when the lights flickered. Once, twice, the refrigerator's hum hiccuped and resumed. Lightning flashed again, closer, and this time the thunder was simultaneous, a sound like the world splitting open. The lights flickered a third time, and then, with a finality that was almost audible, everything went dark. The house plunged into a profound darkness, the kind of darkness only possible far from city lights, where night is truly night. Alex stood frozen for a moment, disoriented by the sudden absence of the familiar hum of electricity that one never quite notices until it has gone. Outside, the storm raged on, rain hammering against the roof and windows, wind howling around the corners of the house. Inside, there was only darkness and the sound of Alex's own breathing. They fumbled for their phone, fingers clumsy, and activated the flashlight. The beam was weak, narrow, casting strange shadows that seemed to emphasize rather than dispel the darkness. Alex made their way carefully to the kitchen, finding the drawer where Mrs. Ashford had mentioned emergency supplies. There were candles, thick and ivory-colored, and a box of long matches. There was also a flashlight, larger and more powerful than their phone's light. Alex grabbed everything and made their way to the living room. The fireplace was massive, and Mrs. Ashford had left it laid with logs and kindling, ready to light. "Roger loves a fire on cold evenings," she'd said during the tour, "though I confess we rarely use it. But please, help yourself if you'd like." Alex had never started a fire in a fireplace this size, had only fumbled with camping fires and the occasional bonfire, but surely the principle was the same. They lit one of the candles first, using its light to arrange more candles around the room, creating small islands of warm, flickering light. Then they turned their attention to the fireplace. The kindling caught easily, thank goodness, small flames licking up to embrace the larger pieces of wood. Alex blew gently, encouraging the fire, adding more kindling when needed. The logs resisted at first, too large and solid to ignite quickly, but Alex was patient, and gradually, slowly, the fire began to take hold. Small flames became larger ones, and larger ones began to crackle and pop, and soon there was genuine heat radiating from the hearth, pushing back the chill that had begun to seep into the house. Outside, the storm continued its assault. Rain lashed the windows in waves, driven by wind that sounded like it was trying to tear the house from its foundation. Lightning flashed with increasing frequency, strobing the darkness, and each flash was followed by thunder so intense it seemed to shake the very air. It was the kind of storm that made you grateful for walls and roofs, for the shelter that separated you from the raw fury of nature. Alex had just settled onto the floor, near the fireplace, arranging cushions from the sofa to make a comfortable nest when they heard it. A small sound, barely audible over the storm. A sound that didn't belong to wind or rain or thunder. A meow, thin, wavering, and utterly pitiful. Alex turned, holding up a candle, and there was Barnaby at the entrance to the living room. He stood crouched low to the ground, his enormous body compressed, his ears flat against his head. His amber eyes were huge in the candlelight, the pupils dilated until they were almost entirely black. He looked, for the first time since Alex had met him, small, vulnerable, afraid. Another crack of thunder shook the house, and Barnaby flinched, his whole body trembling. He meowed again, that same thin, frightened sound, and took a tentative step forward. "Oh, Barnaby," Alex said softly, their chest tightening with sudden, fierce sympathy. The cat took another step, then paused, ears swiveling as though tracking some invisible threat. His internal conflict was visible, pride and fear, warring in real time. He'd spent days establishing his dominance, his independence, his absolute disinterest in this human who'd invaded his space. But now the world had gone dark and loud and terrifying, and pride seemed like a very small thing compared to the need for comfort. Lightning flashed, closer than before, and the thunder that followed was instantaneous and deafening. Barnaby made a decision. He ran not the dignified glide Alex had observed before, but an actual, desperate run across the living room and straight to Alex. He didn't stop running until he had launched himself into Alex's lap, all 20-plus pounds of terrified cat suddenly occupying the space between Alex's crossed legs. The impact nearly knocked Alex backward, but they caught themselves, arms automatically coming up to steady the trembling creature. Barnaby immediately pressed himself against Alex's chest, his face buried in the crook of Alex's arm, his body vibrating with fear. His claws were extended, kneading frantically through the fabric of Alex's shirt into their skin, but gently, carefully, as though even in panic he was trying not to hurt. "It's okay," Alex murmured, one hand coming to rest on Barnaby's back. "You're okay. I've got you." The cat's fur was impossibly soft, even softer than it looked, and so thick that Alex's fingers disappeared into it. They began to stroke slowly, carefully, moving from the top of Barnaby's head, down his spine, in long, steady passes. The cat pressed harder against them with each stroke, trying, it seemed, to physically merge with Alex, to hide inside their shelter. Another flash of lightning, another crack of thunder. Barnaby's claws tightened, and he made a sound Alex had never heard from him before, a small, broken chirp of distress. Without thinking, Alex shifted position, wrapping both arms around the cat, cradling his massive body against their chest. They began to rock slightly, the way one might comfort a frightened child, and whispered a steady stream of soft reassurances. "You're safe. The storm can't hurt you here. I've got you. You're not alone." Gradually, by increments so small they were almost imperceptible, Barnaby began to relax. His claws retracted, then extended again with the next thunder crack, then slowly retracted once more. His breathing, which had been rapid and shallow, began to deepen. And then, so quietly at first that Alex thought they might be imagining it, Barnaby began to purr. It started as a vibration, a subtle tremor that Alex felt through their hands and chest before they heard it. Then it grew, deepening, becoming audible, a low, rumbling, rhythmic sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in the cat's chest. It was nothing like the dainty purrs of smaller cats Alex had known. This was seismic, profound, a sound with actual weight and presence. It thronged through Alex's body where they touched, a vibration that seemed to resonate in their own chest, their own bones. Alex adjusted their position carefully, settling more comfortably against the cushions with their back to the sofa, and Barnaby rearranged himself without ever really leaving the circle of Alex's arms. He ended up sprawled across Alex's lap and lower chest, his head tucked under Alex's chin, his body stretched out in complete, boneless relaxation. The purring continued, steady and deep, and Alex found their own breathing synchronizing with it, slowing to match its rhythm. The storm raged on outside. Rain hammered the roof and windows in waves, sometimes easing to a steady pour, sometimes intensifying to a roar that drowned out all other sound. Lightning continued to flash, turning the darkness bright for split seconds, and thunder rolled and crashed like artillery in the sky. But inside, by the fire, in the small circle of warmth and candlelight, there was peace. Alex kept one hand on Barnaby's back, maintaining the slow, steady stroking that the cat seemed to find soothing. With their other hand, they pulled a throw blanket from the sofa and draped it over both of them. Barnaby made a small sound of approval and somehow pressed even closer, if that were possible. His purring never stopped, never even wavered, a constant, reassuring rumble that seemed to say, "I am here, you are here, we are safe." Time became strange and fluid. Alex lost track of it, couldn't have said whether 10 minutes or an hour had passed. The fire burned down and they added more wood, moving carefully to avoid disturbing Barnaby, who tolerated the brief disruption and immediately settled back once Alex resumed their position. The candles burned lower, their light growing warmer and more intimate. The storm showed no signs of abating, but somehow it no longer felt threatening. It was outside, and they were inside, and that distinction seemed absolute and unbreachable. Alex found their thoughts drifting in the way they do when the body is still, but the mind is content to wander. They thought about connection, about how strange it was that comfort could come from the most unexpected sources. They'd chosen solitude for this holiday, had actively wanted to be alone, and yet here they were, holding a cat who until a few hours ago had treated them with magnificent disdain, and feeling more genuinely companioned than they had in months, perhaps years. There was something about the honesty of it, Alex thought drowsily. Barnaby hadn't pretended affection he didn't feel. He'd maintained his distance, his independence, right up until the moment when he genuinely needed something. And then he'd asked for it in his way and trusted Alex to provide it. There was no performance in it, no social obligation or expectation, just need offered honestly and comfort given freely. Alex thought about their family Thanksgiving that they'd skipped, about the complicated dynamics and the weight of expectations. They thought about all the times they'd felt lonely in crowded rooms, disconnected while surrounded by people. And then they looked down at Barnaby, at his enormous fluffy form completely relaxed in their lap, at his flat face peaceful in sleep, and felt more connected, more truly seen and accepted than they had in countless proper social situations. "You stole my turkey," Alex whispered to the sleeping cat, smiling. "And somehow I think you gave me something better." The purring, and possibly seemed to deepen in response, though Barnaby's eyes remained closed. The storm moved through its phases, the violent, almost angry intensity of its peak gradually giving way to a steadier rain and eventually to a soft, constant patter. The thunder grew more distant, moving east, and the lightning became occasional rather than constant. The power remained out, but it didn't matter. The fire provided warmth and light, the candles added their gentle glow, and the darkness outside became less oppressive and more peaceful, just the natural darkness of a late November night. Alex's eyes grew heavy. The warmth of the fire, the weight and heat of Barnaby in their lap, the rhythmic vibration of his purr all combined to create a kind of hypnotic comfort. They let their head rest back against the sofa cushion, their hands still moving slowly through Barnaby's fur, and allowed their eyes to close. Just for a moment, they told themselves. Just a brief rest. They woke to pale, gray light filtering through the windows. The rain had stopped, though water still dripped from the eaves, and the world outside looked washed clean. The fire had burned down to embers, glowing faintly in the hearth. The candles had guttered out hours ago, and Barnaby was still there, still sprawled across Alex's lap, still purring, though more softly now, a contented rumble, rather than the desperate vibration of the night before. Alex stirred carefully, and Barnaby's eyes opened, great amber pools that regarded Alex with an expression that could only be described as ... fond. His ears were forward, relaxed. His body remained loose and trusting. When Alex moved their hand to stretch cramped fingers, Barnaby's head pushed up into their palm, demanding more attention, and Alex laughed softly and obliged. "Good morning," Alex murmured. Barnaby chirped, a sound entirely different from his distressed cries during the storm. This was conversational, friendly. He stretched, extending his front legs in a long, luxurious reach that showed off his impressive toe beans, then settled back into a more compact loaf shape on Alex's lap. Clearly, he had no intention of moving anytime soon. The power came back a few minutes later with a distant hum and the sudden glow of a lamp Alex had left on in the hallway. The normalcy of electric light felt almost jarring after the intimacy of firelight and darkness. Alex reached for their phone and discovered it was nearly 7 in the morning. They'd spent the entire night on the living room floor, holding a cat, and somehow felt more rested than they had in weeks. "You're going to be hungry," Alex said to Barnaby, who blinked in acknowledgement but made no move to leave his comfortable position. Eventually, necessity won out over comfort. Alex needed to use the bathroom. Their legs had gone numb, and Barnaby did, in fact, need his breakfast. They stood carefully, prompting a disgruntled meow from the cat, and made their way to the kitchen. Barnaby followed, but differently than before. Instead of his usual aloof glide, appearing independently, as though by coincidence he actively trailed Alex, staying close enough that his fur occasionally brushed against their legs. While Alex prepared Barnaby's breakfast, the cat did something unprecedented. He rubbed against Alex's ankles, not once but multiple times, weaving between their legs in a figure-8 pattern that nearly tripped them. When Alex set down his food bowl, Barnaby paused before eating to look up at them, and Alex would have sworn the cat's expression conveyed gratitude. The day unfolded with a new rhythm. Barnaby still claimed his favorite spots, the sunny patch of rug, the study windowsill, the library chair, but now, when Alex entered whichever room he occupied, he would chirp a greeting. When Alex sat down to read, Barnaby would emerge from wherever he'd been napping and drape himself across their lap or settle against their side. When Alex moved through the house, Barnaby followed, a large, fluffy shadow, who seemed to have decided that being near this human was preferable to solitary dignity. They found the turkey leg bone later that afternoon, abandoned beneath the sofa. Barnaby showed no interest in reclaiming it. He was too busy supervising Alex's activities, offering commentary in the form of chirps and trills, and demanding regular attention in the form of chin scratches and ear rubs. The remaining days of Alex's house sit passed in a kind of peaceful companionship that felt, somehow, more profound than many human friendships. There was an honesty to it, an absence of pretense. Barnaby had needed something and had asked for it. Alex had provided it, and in the process, something had shifted between them. Some fundamental understanding reached that transcended the usual boundaries between human and pet, between temporary caretaker and actual family. On their last evening, Alex sat in the library with Barnaby sprawled across their lap, so heavy and warm that getting up seemed unthinkable. The cat's purr was a constant, soothing rumble, and Alex found themselves reluctant to think about leaving, about returning to their new apartment and their regular life. They would miss this, they realized. Not just the house with its quiet luxury, but this specific cat, this specific companionship. "Your people come home tomorrow," Alex said softly, stroking Barnaby's head. "You'll be happy to see them." Barnaby's purr never faltered, but he opened his eyes and regarded Alex with that amber stare, and Alex had the strangest feeling that the cat understood more than seemed possible. When the Ashfords returned the next afternoon, tanned and relaxed from their Italian holiday, they found Alex and Barnaby curled up together on the library sofa. The cat sprawled possessively across Alex's lap. "Well," Mrs. Ashford said, stopping in the doorway with an expression of pure astonishment. "I've never seen him do that with anyone but Roger." "We had an eventful Thanksgiving," Alex said, smiling down at Barnaby, who had opened one eye at the sound of his people say's voices, but showed no inclination to leave his comfortable position. They told the story over tea, the stolen turkey, the storm, the long night by the fire. Mrs. Ashford laughed until she cried, and even Roger cracked a smile. When it came time for Alex to leave, Barnaby followed them to the door, meowing plaintively, and Alex felt their chest tighten with unexpected emotion. "You're welcome back any time," Mrs. Ashford said warmly. "To house sit or just to visit? I think you've made quite an impression." Alex knelt down one last time to scratch Barnaby's ears, and the cat pushed his head firmly into their hand, purring loudly. "Happy Thanksgiving, Barnaby," Alex whispered. "Thanks for the turkey and everything else." Driving away, watching the Ashford estate recede in the rearview mirror, Alex felt the strange bittersweetness of ending something that had been unexpectedly meaningful. They'd gone into that Thanksgiving expecting solitude and finding it sufficient. Instead, they'd found connection complicated, honest, and entirely on its own terms. They'd learned that sometimes the family we find, even for just a few days, even in the form of a grumpy cat who steals our dinner, can teach us something essential about what it means to need and to be needed, to offer comfort and to accept it. And isn't that, after all, what Thanksgiving is supposed to be about? Not the perfect meal or the proper setting or even the expected company, but the honest recognition of what we have to be grateful for, found in the most unexpected places. If this story resonated with you, please consider showing your support with a like and subscribe to Deep Sleep Stories Hub for more quiet nights and restful journeys.